Welcome everyone to our City Council work session for February 26th. Welcome to everyone at home and everyone here. And we have a little adjusted council agenda today. So first up, we're going to talk about rest stops. Right, City Manager?
Yes, ma'am. I'll just pass out something and then I'll read to the statement.
Thank you.
As that's going around. Homelessness is a complex issue, and we have a civic and moral responsibility to respond in thoughtful and caring ways towards those who find themselves in unsafe, unhealthy, and often desperate situations. I wrestle with finding a solution that compassionately supports those who find themselves in untenable situations because of substance abuse, mental illness, poor choices, or circumstances beyond their control, without enabling or prolonging that untenable lifestyle. Eugene has a long and rich history of individuals, organizations, and agencies laboring together to find a balanced solution that meets the daily needs of the homeless community. I am encouraged by those who are on the front lines of this concern, but unfortunately the public and nonprofit system is overloaded and the needs continue to grow. This overburdened system is one reason why I believe Occupy Village and the rest stops are a helpful piece of our solution at this time. Both are testing the viability of self-supporting models that minimize reliance on the public sector and established nonprofit organizations. If successful, small managed transitional communities may become one more tool in our toolbox, adding capacity to an already overstretched network. The Sleeps movement has raised community awareness about the plight of homeless, and along with Occupy Medical has provided practical, real-time help to many homeless community members. However, reacting and responding to Sleeps and finding and establishing rest stops has required a significant amount of council and staff time and effort over the last 2 years for a small portion of our homeless population. The Broadway and Hilliard site was illegally established last fall. Over the succeeding 5 months, the number of campers ballooned as high as 50 to 60, but generally averaged 35 to 40. Some have remained on site for the duration, while others have come and gone, some having arrived only within the past week. My sense is that the core group of 30 or so is supplemented by a revolving transit population. Anecdotally, my visit to the site a couple of months ago affirmed this pattern. A census 2 nights ago counted 42 campers. Last month, you directed that prior to closing the site, we need to provide options for accommodating campers who were at the Broadway and Hilliard location at that time. Practically, this means identifying or creating capacity for 35 to 40 campers. Feasible sites are few, and all conflict with some of the direction that Council previously has provided. Other potential sites require agreement from intergovernmental partners or private parties. Significant capacity currently exists at the Mission and the rest stop of the Northwest Expressway. The Mission has space for 10 women and 15 to 20 men, and they can accommodate those with disabilities. But people wanting to stay at the Mission must make the decision not to consume alcohol or drugs. The Mission's commitment to transitioning its residents to wellness dictates that those choosing this path not be exposed to ongoing substance abuse. Jack Tripp, Executive Director of the Mission, recently visited the Broadway and Hilliard site and estimates that only 5 to 7 campers would choose to abstain from alcohol or drugs in order to stay at the Mission. The rest stop of the Northwest Expressway will open in March and will accommodate up to 15 people. The Mission and existing rest stop combined can accommodate 30 to 40, although relatively few may choose to meet the Mission's no consumption policy. Another 15 campers can be accommodated by adding a second rest stop at the Northwest Expressway location. If the Council approves that additional rest stop, another rest stop operator would be required. Hopefully, one or more individuals from the coalition supporting the current Hill site would step forward and agree to be the operator of this new rest stop. Finally, Opportunities for any remaining Broadway and Hilliard campers can be pursued through the car camping program or other venues. In summary, 2 rest stops at the Northwest Expressway can accommodate up to 30 people. The Mission has additional capacity for 25 to 30 people, although realistically the Mission's requirements may limit that to another 5 to 7. Accommodations for any remaining campers would be on a case-by-case basis. Capacity would be available, but the Broadway and Hilliard campers would have to choose to avail themselves of these opportunities. Lastly, I recommend that the closing of the Broadway and Hilliard site commence April 1st, 2014, and not be contingent upon a rest stop operator stepping forward. Rest stops, although helpful, are for the most part Band-Aids for a few. Therefore, I would encourage Council to consider the following motion and then redirect our energies to other strategies that have the hope of permanence and transitioning people to wellness. And I'll pass out that motion, but what it says is, I move that council approve the city manager's recommendations, including A, council authorizing 1 additional rest stop at the Northwest Expressway location, B, staff working with social service providers to assist campers at the Broadway and Hilliard site in transitioning to one of the rest stop locations, the Mission, car camp locations, or other venues. And C, staff closing the Broadway Hilliard location beginning not later than April 1st, 2014.
Thank you, Manager. We're going to open this up for discussion now. Looking around. Yes, George.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got a question. How many people are at the Garfield rest stop site currently?
I believe, and Michael might have, is it 15? 15.
15, yeah, and that was the limit there, right? That was the 15. And then how many are at Opportunity Village?
It holds up to 30, and I'm not sure if they're at 30 yet.
30.
You have that? At 30. 25.
There's 25 there now, okay. And what limit did we set for that, the population there? 30 people? Because it can hold more than that. I mean, there's plenty of room. Well, my concern with this motion is it's my understanding that the 2 rest stops in Opportunity Village, rightly so, have one of the governing rules is no alcohol and no drugs. And the nice thing about Whoville, I believe, I've been there a few times, is that they're housing people. Some of the people have been very troublesome, and they've been visited many, many, many times by the police downtown and in the environs of downtown. And it's my understanding that those frequent police contacts with those individuals has dropped pretty drastically in some cases once the anxiety of them not having a safe place to stay at night has been alleviated by being able to sleep there, that they're no longer causing the problems that they were before, or at least it's dropped significantly anyway. And we know that part of the problem is alcohol and drug abuse, along with unaddressed mental health issues. So, and those people will not be welcome at the existing shelters. And they're not at the Mission, and they won't be at Opportunity Village or the 2 rest stops. So I kind of see Whoville operating, probably totally by accident, as kind of a housing first model, in that no one is turned away, unless perhaps they're violent at the time and then try to come in. And that's housing first. Is that theory or that strategy is, you're a chronic alcoholic, well, we're still going to find you a place to stay. And I think all the literature shows that once you've done that, the people that are grappling with mental health issues, well, they remember to take their medication, Or they remember that I'm supposed to be taking medication, and they take their medication, and they have visits.
George, another round?
Yes, please.
Mike?
I suppose the first thing I'll say is I tend to support the manager's recommendation. I'm disappointed that we don't have a broader conversation about how to address the issue of those who need help in a better long-term way to deal with this. We've discussed briefly, and I brought up the idea of us acting as a resource base where people might find appropriate places to stay. I think we should develop that into a more robust system. I think we should spend more time talking about how to do that well, so that we bring more members of the community in as part of the solution. At the same time, it often troubles me to read and to hear people say that Whoville is working, because it's not. It's not working for the nearby neighbors. It's not working for residents who work in nearby locations, because we hear from them too. When we see the pictures that we saw of people who have had to endure the cold weather and the frostbite and the things that they've had to deal with medically, being exposed in this way, it's not working for them to live this way. And we need to be doing something different than this. So in that light, I'm in favor of us moving in the direction the manager puts forward of not creating more campsites, but for searching for better longer-term options that we can be a part of with bringing other members of the community in. So I'll support this.
So I've got Chris in the queue and Betty. Just to clarify, the second rest stop site is already established, which is the Northwest Expressway, and now you're in this motion, you're suggesting a third site with two on the same location.
Yes.
Correct, right. I just wanted to clarify that. So you really are expanding the...
Adding one additional rest site,
Right.
and the location is co-located, or in that same site where that one is.
And then I know that we received a memo from Glenn, and I want to clarify that, which said that the host of the rest stop sites have an agreement with the city over property, but they do have some leeway in terms of the rules they put in place at those rest stops.
Correct. What the ordinance does that the council passed and what the rules do that the manager adopted limit the rest stop to 15, prohibits alcohol and use of alcohol and having alcohol and drugs on the site. Beyond that, it's up to the operator. So if the operator wants to restrict the hours from dusk to dawn, the operator can, but the operator doesn't have to do that. If the operator wants to prohibit people who are inebriated or otherwise under the influence, the operator can choose to do that, but there's nothing in the rules that prohibits somebody who is intoxicated from actually being at a rest stop. What the rules prohibit is the use of or possession of alcohol or illegal drugs on the site.
Thank you for that clarification. And then thirdly, I just wanted to make a, my time should be ticking. I just want to make the comment that there are conversations going on. In fact, this very morning, we had HUD representatives down here talking with Springfield and Lane County and Eugene about how we could launch some more long-term thinking about how to actually create more permanent housing opportunities for people and reduce the numbers of folks who are unhoused. And so there is the beginning of a conversation, and at the same time, the county is putting together a new continuum of care committee, which can bring not only the folks that we normally see, but people from the education community, people from the medical community, people from the law enforcement community, broaden the range of people who are engaged in this discussion, so that we can move from the place that we are to a better place that will really offer some real solutions and real opportunities for people. So that is beginning to happen, and you will be hearing about it as soon as we've got something to share. Chris, you're up.
Thank you. Just for my own understanding, part of the original planning around the notion of rest stops was that they would have an operator, and that we would provide a location, but beyond that, we would really not be involved beyond the location, that we would find an operator to run it. And that was kind of like what we were all wanting to work toward. Is the fact that you can only really recommend this one additional rest stop a result of having a challenging time finding an operator for the potential sites we might open, or are we having a hard time finding operators, or is that process taking longer than we thought it would take?
The 2 rest stops currently have an operator who I think is doing a great job as I've visited that site and had a chance to talk with them. The limiting factor has more to do with the site than the operator. Because we haven't opened up another rest stop, we don't know who all out there might be willing to operate it, but it's very difficult to find a site that, one, doesn't already complicate or doesn't conflict with what council has already said that they don't prefer not to have in a park, in a residential area next to a school, those kinds of things. So it's very difficult to find sites. And other public agencies or private agencies that we have had any conversation with have not so far stepped up and said, yes, we're willing to put a site in a particular place. That could change over time, but at this moment they haven't. So the limiting factor has more to do with the site at this moment than the operator.
Okay. Because I know that there's lots of different possibilities that reflect some of the conversations that we've been having around finding partners and working with other folks, but I understand that takes time. And I think we're all really of a like mind when we talk about the long-term solutions. I mean, everything that Mike suggested and others have suggested around long-term solutions, we absolutely want to go down that path. The continuum that moves people into self-sufficiency is the ultimate goal of what we're doing. But even as we talk about the long-term strategy, there is an immediate issue that has to be dealt with. And I agree, the Whoville site needs to close. The question for me was not whether or not to close it. It's always been, when can we close it in an orderly way? And what you're proposing to say is, by one way or another, you believe you have found some kind of accommodation for the people currently at the Whoville site.
Yes. What we're saying is there is capacity, as we've articulated here. The people at the Broadway and Hilliard site, of course, will have to choose whether or not they avail themselves of that, but we believe the capacity is there.
If we were to take the action that you're recommending today, would that in any way inhibit or slow down or cause us to be a little more relaxed about continuing the effort to find additional rest stop sites? I mean, like, the pressure's off, we can slow down, or would we still be working to find rest stop sites?
We would not be looking for additional rest stop sites immediately. October 1st is the date in which the sunset occurs, and so as we move towards October 1st, I think there'll be a couple of things we'll be taking a look at. One is we'll have conversations ahead of October 1st to see where the council wants to move with that whole topic about villages and rest stops. It could be continuing what's currently there or changing that. It may be more or less. And depending on that conversation, we then may re-engage in a more vigorous effort around rest stops moving forward. With that said, one of the directions that the council has given to us is to coordinate with the county on a host of things related to homelessness, which we will, one of which will be the conversation around sites. How that turns out or when that turns out, I don't know, but that will be a part of a broad range of things we will want to talk to the county about.
Probably the only real red flag that might occur to me around what you're recommending is that this could cause us to begin to lose momentum. And thinking in terms of short term, I think, if we were to go ahead and pass this, I wouldn't want to see this as us losing momentum on trying to accommodate it's still a problem. It's still there. And so I would just say that we still need to work on the short term and through whether it's through partnerships or talking with folks or identifying sites, and this council can help you in whatever way we can. I wouldn't want the passage of this to cause us to start losing momentum and continuing to try to address this problem, particularly with fall coming on. So that's my biggest concern. I don't want suddenly people to start falling through the cracks because we've done this, and I don't think that's your intention, but I wouldn't want it to happen even accidentally.
Yeah, I think, and the mayor and Mike and others have articulated, I think from our perspective, my perspective, it would offer an opportunity to redirect energies into a different focus. And the focus isn't ignoring, but I think the focus is where do we want our best outcomes to be, not just today or tomorrow, but next month and next year. And that's where I concur with many of you that that's where the energy can refocus and where we want to refocus our energy there. So we wouldn't lose momentum in the whole topic. The specific rest stop topic will come back around as we move towards October, so there'll be some conversations there.
I would just encourage us to move with as much diligence as we can to keep all the plates spinning and not let any fall off.
Betty?
Thank you. Obviously, what we need is a shelter. I think that's more important than we need something that's transitional where people can have a roof over their heads. And I would hope that we would devote a joint elected officials meeting to talking about how to get shelters in this area. I think it's more urgent than some of the other things we've discussed at those meetings. And it is not just Eugene's problem. But I admit I haven't been to Whoville. I didn't even get to the open house, so I haven't seen it personally. But from what I've heard, it's a lot better than people being on the streets, and people have to be somewhere. I would be inclined to say we should let it be temporarily. I mean, more until there's something else. I think it's sort of like, it's not the same, but it's sort of like community gardens, which in some cities, any empty space can be used for a garden, and people know it's temporary. It isn't forever, but until the space is needed for something else, and then you find another spot for a community garden. And this is a different kind of thing, but this space is not being used for anything, is it? The space where they have Whoville?
That's correct. It's not currently being, or hadn't been used for anything
Well, it's
prior
empty
to
space.
that.
And true, it was illegal when they went there. It still is, I guess. But it's not being used for anything else, and if it's a place for people to be better than the alternatives, I think we should let them stay there and then work diligently to try to, I would like, for some of the money we've spent for what do we call it? We don't call it subsidized, but it is for subsidized housing. I think would be better spent for transitional housing while people become able to find something on their own rather than something subsidized by the government. And I guess that's... Oh, is it taking staff time now to run Whoville? I understood it was being done by volunteers.
It is being run by volunteers, so the staff time for running or being a part of that Broadway and Hilliard site, there's some police response and other responses. I don't know as there's a lot of administrative staff time, but Sarah, you might know. Or
No, I think you're right on.
Right, so I don't think we're spending an inordinate amount of admin or staff time
And could
there.
it be that the police are spending less time than if the same people were on the streets downtown?
Could be, and that would be a question for the chief. I know we have a liaison which works well, and so that time is actually well spent. So we do have a liaison through the police department, and
I suppose you've seen on the web, I don't know what site it was, but that this is being held up in other parts of the country as a good example.
I have seen some of that.
Okay, thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the city manager's efforts around this. I'm not sure where I'm going to land. This is a real challenge. As the mayor pointed out, we do have efforts underway to talk about, and I appreciate Councilor Taylor's idea of using a joint elected officials meeting to talk more about creating better options for temporary and transitional shelter solutions that are better than a pitched tent on a vacant lot. But we still face the immediate problem of currently unhoused people with their own health and safety problems and the impact that their activities have had on downtown and other neighborhoods when they weren't able to be at the Whoville site, apparently, anecdotally. And I, for one, don't want people going back out to our protected wetlands to camp illegally there. And I really recognize the challenge of finding locations given all the constraints that the council added to the potential sites. You know, we've always faced the prospect that the people occupying Broadway and Hilliard would choose not to relocate even if we offered alternatives, and that's a real tough place for me, and I'm assuming others around the table, because right now I can't support allowing the continued illegal occupation at that site. I think if we felt like we couldn't find an alternative, I might support designating it as a rest stop and making it a part of the legal framework, but that would mean reducing the number of people who can be there to 15. I think 30 to 40 people is too large and creates an inordinate negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood. The sites that we've created at 15 was very deliberate, try to mitigate impact on folks. And this is a little off topic, but in terms of our planning and development work in this town, we spend a lot of time talking about any kind of new housing development that might end up placing 30 or 40 new residents next to existing housing. So we can't just pretend that that's not an issue for people, and we pay a lot of attention to it in our formal process, and I think it needs to be taken into account as we think about where these folks can be and be safe. I wouldn't want to give up on finding another site if we did decide to take the city manager's recommendation. Right now, we're proposing to add yet another rest stop in Ward 7. That does not thrill me, but I also recognize that, again, given the constraints of locations, that may be the only option we have right at the moment. This is a pilot project, and we're really trying to test out if these options can work and then perhaps set them up with fewer constraints in terms of locations as we revisit this as we get closer to the sunset date.
Rich Bowling?
Thank you. Where do I start? Well, I guess I'll just start by, I moved to separate the motion. Motion on the table to vote on it independently, A, B, and C.
Lynn's got something he wants to say.
There's no motion on the table at the moment,
Yeah.
so you can take whatever motion you want.
Okay, all right, well then, I'll wait until that time comes unless the maker of the motion will put the motion out that way.
Or you can put one out the way you want, George. The part of it that you want to put up.
Well, I don't know if that would, I guess I could go ahead and just make one motion after the next.
Sure.
Okay, then I move that council approve the city manager's recommendation of council authorizing one additional rest stop at the Northwest Expressway location. If I get a second, I'd like to speak to that.
Second.
Okay, when we started this whole project out, we set some goals and guidelines that we were going to follow. And since then, it's been a moving target. We've changed deadline dates. We've changed the number of possible sites. So I can't support the motion I just made because, one, it's adding an additional site from our original intent of this program, as well as, to me, these are not rest stops, these are campgrounds. And I can't vote for authorizing campgrounds at this point.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I can support, now that this is separated, some of the other parts. This particular part of creating a third campground, I can't support. In agreement with George, that was never a part of our original conversation about what we were willing to try as a test. I mean, we're coming back in October to review the results of our test, but we keep changing the test as we go, and I'm not in favor of doing that. But I absolutely can support the staff working with social service folks to be able to assist those folks who are in need and getting the Broadway site transitioned. So I'll vote against this as well.
Anyone else want to speak to this motion? Chris?
Yeah, I will support this because I think part of what we need to do is continue to be flexible as the situation evolves. And I think if we say it was 2 at the beginning, it's 2 now, and it will always forever be 2, doesn't really kind of recognize that the scope of this problem is as large as it is. I mean, saying we've done our due diligence at 30 people is sufficient, to me, is not enough. I'm not looking to establish a whole bunch of rest stops. I'm not trying to solve the entire problem with a 50 or 60 rest stops, but I think that the problem is significant enough that 2 is not enough. Now we're back to like prunes: is 2 enough? Is 6 too many? I don't know what the exact amount of appropriate rest stops are, but I think that the 2 we've already talked about only gets us part way, and I would like to see us consider adding some additional rest stops, not a whole bunch, but at least to have a little bit more significant dent. So I think authorizing an additional one at Northwest Expressway is an extremely modest effort to try to move a little bit further along. So I don't see us as kind of like the camel's nose under the tent. I think what we're really doing is just trying to be flexible in responding to what is a very concerning problem. But it doesn't, to me, take any focus away from the fact we need to focus on long-term solutions. That really is what the ultimate goal is. And so I don't want us to spend too much of our effort at the front end, but there has to be a front end in order to have the entire process.
I've got Claire and George and Greg in the queue on this one, and my only comment is, of course, at the very beginning of the conversation of rest stops, we had certain of us who supported the concept of rest stops in the first place, and certain of us who didn't. And so from the beginning, there was we have a majority of our council that supports the rest stop concept, but it's not there's no consensus on that. And of course, as we said from the beginning, these rest stops are sort of exploratory, and so you learn and you alter your plans because you learn, and hopefully we'll keep on learning and keep on adjusting, because that's how we try to improve our response to the situations that face us. Claire, you're next.
Thank you. Well, I'd support the motion mainly because I think we need to find one more alternative. Obviously, could be many, many more before we could offer a safe space to every person who's experiencing homelessness in our community. But right now, we're trying to address what's going on at Broadway and Hilliard, and I can't see how, in good faith, we can do that without providing at least one more sanctioned place. And I really appreciate the other piece of the city manager's suggested motion of some real on-the-ground work to work with individuals who may not be relocated to that additional rest stop to find them another place. So I tend to agree with Councilor Pryor in terms of thinking about this not so much as a moving target, but being responsive and flexible to the need, which is very complicated, and we have limited capacity to be responsive towards. So in my view, this is part of our limited capacity to be responsive to create this additional rest stop.
George Brown?
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, I will definitely support this motion. What is the right number of rest stops? How many do we need? I think we need as many I think the answer to that is however many are necessary to provide safe shelter for people who are unable to provide, for whatever reason, provide themselves with safe, well-ordered shelter. And I don't know what that number is. We know there's several hundred people that are unhoused. So yes, and are they Band-Aids? Yes, of course this is the Band-Aid solution. But it's the best Band-Aid that we have, and it's totally supported by the people at Shelter Care and St. Vinny's and many of the other organizations who are doing everything they can to they're stretched to their maximum capacity. There's the waiting list to get housing is 1.5, 2 years, over 2 years. So, yeah, is this the most ideal solution? No, it's not. But it's practical, virtually no cost, low cost to the city, and I think we need to do as many of these as necessary.
Greg?
I can support the motion with a modification that we cap the number at 3. And the reason why I say this is because I think between now and October 1st, we have an opportunity to work with our partners at the county to develop, create, and site a viable emergency shelter as a temporary transitional facility to get people off the street, to get them in warm, safe setting. We have enough buildings around this community that are currently not occupied by anybody or anything, that I'm sure that we, in concert with the county, can find a way to acquire a facility that we can retrofit to make work for this particular purpose in lieu of a longer-term solution. Having more rest stops and more camps where people are getting rained on and freeze to death is not the solution that we seek. It may work in the summertime, but it's not going to work in the fall. It doesn't work in the winter, and we can't keep going month to month, year to year with the same situation. We're trying to do the best we can. We understand what our parameters are in terms of our city capacity, and we really need to, I think, quite frankly, turn the heat up on some of our friends to, make something happen that is going to transition the entire community into a much more reasonable, sane strategy for handling this situation. And we're not going to do that as long as we let other people off the hook. So if George is amenable to my amendment, my little brief amendment, that we cap it at 3 with the intention of, accelerating this conversation with the county, I think that this is the appropriate way to move our conversation not only forward, but to move a solution forward that's better for the people who are on the street and the community itself.
I'll accept that as a friendly.
And your second?
I will not.
You were the second?
Yeah. Try it as a separate motion.
So you just need a separate motion if that's what you want to do. All right, it stays where it is. And Mike?
Can I ask a point of order to the, isn't that inherent already in the motion as it stands now? It says 1 additional rest stop. That means 3. So there is no, it's already kind of
Until another motion is
cap,
made.
unless, but anybody can pass another motion at any time. So
Right.
I would think that your intent to cap it is inherent in the motion that's on here by authorizing 1 additional. So
It is.
it's a moot, it's a moot issue.
Yeah, but I want to make sure that
Yeah.
there's no
Ambiguity.
back door, no ambiguity to that.
Yeah.
We can change your mind in the future, we always
All right.
do.
All right. Mike, did you want to say
Thank you,
something?
Mayor,
We're
I
gonna
do. I'm thinking about this, and as we separate this motion down, there are pieces of this that some of us find more acceptable than others, and I don't want a confused message about how this comes out, or for us to tear apart part of the manager's recommendation and only pass part of it. So I'm going to move to rejoin the entire motion, A, B, and C together, because I would be in favor of, I suppose what I'm doing is making a substitute motion that includes all the other parts, which I certainly would be willing to vote in favor of.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. I don't see any questions on that, so let's vote on the substitute motion. Yes.
And just to be clear, what you're voting now is to substitute this for George's original
Right,
motion.
right.
You're not actually voting to approve.
Right, we have to do this and then vote again if...
Correct.
Okay. All right, so all those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, it passes. So then we vote on the amended motion and the substitute motion, which is now the main motion. All those in favor? Oh, you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I move to amend the motion by, in subsection C, staff closing the Broadway Hilliard location to be completed no later than April 1st, 2014.
Is there a second? See, no second. No second. Okay, so now we're back to this, the main motion here. All those in favor, please indicate.
Can I address the motion
Yes,
briefly?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, there's a motion.
Yeah, my concern is, I'm worried about, now it's possible the Mission does have some capacity and they'll take some people. Then there's 15 spots, if this motion passes, at the second rest stop. My concern is there's going to be several people at Whoville who are going to be left out of this process and fall through the cracks. And that other camps will self-start again because people have to go somewhere, and they will figure out a place to go, and it will probably be in a place where people don't want to see them. But it's just like, I think it's just going to perpetuate what we've been seeing happening the last couple of years. And so I'm not sure I can support this motion, although I do. That's why I welcomed the splitting of it, because I will certainly want to see the other rest stop established. But I have problems with some of the other elements of the original motion. And so my concern about the April 1st, drop dead date is, I'm just afraid there's some people there there's some disabled people, there's some people with drug and alcohol problems and mental health problems who are actually functioning pretty well at Whoville. They're being taken care of by some of the other residents. And I'm just wondering, is anyone going to do that at these other places for them? Some of them are not going to be eligible for the Mission. So, and their choices, at the rest stops are limited. So, I don't know if everyone can be accommodated by April 1st.
So next is Betty and then Clara.
Thank you. I would have voted for the other motion to establish a third rest stop, but I'm not ready to vote for this one because of the compulsory mandatory closing of Whoville by April 1st.
Claire.
If we don't separate it, I can't vote for it.
So I'm leaning towards supporting this motion, although it causes me a lot of concern. I share a lot of the concerns that Councilor Brown shares. And the reason I didn't support the changing the other motion to include limiting it to 3 rest stops is because I think that precludes the possibility of the county or another agency or a private property owner deciding that they actually could accommodate a rest stop, and I wouldn't want to foreclose that out of hand and have to come back to another meeting and pass another motion to make that happen. Obviously, we'd have to approve the site as a council motion, but we're not going to be able to accommodate everyone. We just don't have the capacity, and again, I think we're just crashing right into our limitations in terms of this city being able to address these challenges. And while I don't like the mandatory closure, as I said, I do feel like the site either needs to be a legal rest stop or it needs to be closed. And I'll note the wording of this motion says, without the change, staff closing the Broadway and Hilliard location beginning not later than April 1st. It doesn't set a firm date of when the site actually has to be clear. So in my mind, that implies continuing to work with folks who may be more challenging to find alternatives for, rather than just simply throwing people off the site.
So I've got Mike and George polling in the queue, and I would just take note of the way that I know we're into the next thing, but we got to get through this. I would take note of currently, I would say that it looks like, unless somebody comes up with something that has more meetings of the mind, there will be no meetings of the mind on this one. That's what I'm looking at right now. So that's just something for you to consider. That
My own mind.
I'm just saying, if I'm counting correctly and listening to people correctly, it looks like this won't pass. So if you want something to happen, you're going to have to think about what you want to happen. Just saying. Okay, Mike and George Paul.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe this will pass. I believe, and I hope it will. That's the reason I made the motion to bring it together rather than as parts, because I believe broken apart, we couldn't get all the things we need to do meaningfully accomplished. I think this isn't perfect for anybody at the table. This complete prescription has pieces that everyone at the table can find disagreement with. The question is, this is the manager's best idea of how to address everyone's concerns and move this forward. And so certainly there's parts of this I disagree with and I'd like to say no to. But I'm hoping that we can all come together and say, all right, it's not perfect, it's not the best thing for me, but I guess this has enough in it that we can all agree on to move forward together.
George Pauly.
Thank you. I said it Monday night. I think that we're actually trying to go at this problem in the wrong direction. And I agree 100% with Greg that we need to be working with our jurisdictional partners, not only the county and Springfield, but the state and the national, not the national level too. There are parts of this that I'm willing to support, and then there are parts that I'm not willing to support. So, my vote is going to reflect that, and hopefully that when we talk about closing the Broadway and Hilliard location, that the people there will take advantage of what's being offered to them by the city and get some their own effort into moving on to transitioning from where they are to a more permanent situation. And we're always going to be dealing with that, and I believe the mission's estimate is 5 to 7. We're always going to be dealing with a certain amount of people that aren't going to want to take advantage of what's being offered to them. And we're also going to be dealing with the percentage of people that choose this type of lifestyle. And those are the people the ones that choose this type of lifestyle that should maybe take a second look. I mean, I believe that we're doing all we can as a city organization to help the folks that are in this situation through no fault of their own. And there are a lot of people out there that are homeless because of no fault of their own. And that's where I think a majority of our effort should be placed, and also with the folks that have the mental health issues and the drug and alcohol issues. But the ones that choose to be homeless, they need to step up a little bit too, and perhaps take another look at their situation and maybe take advantage of some of these things that are being offered to them.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote on the motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. In opposition? 1, 2. It passes. Thank you all very much. So, with that, we'll move on to the next item. This is enhancing current integrated pest management in parks.
Thank you, Mayor, and Kevin Finney will be leading our discussion on this item. That's the motion that they passed.
Hi.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Finney. I'm the Park Operations Manager in the Parks and Open Space Division. For the past few months, we've been coordinating with Councilor Surratt on preparing some information and a draft resolution for consideration. Councilor Surratt, would it work? Shall I go? Do you want to do?
I'll just say briefly, this was something that was actually encouraged through Beyond Toxics, and Lisa Arkin's organization, thinking about the situation around bees, but not only just that, and thinking about how we can support some of the really good practices already happening in our parks and open spaces and continue those. So I'll let Kevin give his presentation.
Okay. I have with me some slides that constitute a sort of a primer on integrated pest management. It's similar to what we presented about a year ago. Everyone wasn't here then. If that would be helpful, we can run through those to help folks understand. If you'd like to get right to the content and move toward the resolution, I can do that. Shall we go through them? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I'll talk briefly about what kinds of pests we control. City staff are managing now. A little bit about integrated pest management, so everyone's on the same page there. I'll talk about how we're partnering to reduce the use of pesticides throughout the city organization, then I can take some questions. So just kind of quickly, what kinds of pests are we controlling and why are we using pesticides? The things we're most frequently working with are weeds, typically in parks, such as ivy, blackberry, and other invasives and non-natives. And then we are also managing mice, ants, and in parks particularly, it's wasps. So stinging insects in the parks. The integrated pest management is a framework for making decisions about the use of pesticides, but it's probably more importantly, it's about a framework for making decisions about managing a pest. So the framework starts with establishing action thresholds. That's sort of a reflection of what level of pest involvement or presence we can tolerate in a particular setting. Then there's an emphasis on identification and monitoring. We need to know the pest, know its biology, know where it's vulnerable, know what its interests are. Then we work to prevent and manage the pest before they become a problem. So if we know the biology, we know when to kind of push down on it, when to make sure we're not providing habitat and so forth. This things like putting the food away so we don't attract mice, that sort of thing. Controlling actions when preventive methods do not manage the pest, that's the next step. So that might mean removing wasp nests. It might mean spraying a wasp nest. It might mean heavy mulching to discourage weeds. It might mean making a pesticide application if the other sort of less invasive methods aren't effective. And then finally, the IPM process methodology includes evaluation and adjustment. So we would look at what we've done, evaluate the success of it, and make adjustments as necessary. So nowhere here are pesticides called for. They are also not precluded in this methodology. So this is the methodology being used in parks for managing all the parks. Facilities is using this for managing facilities. It's also in place at the wastewater treatment plant. So here's a list of some places: fire stations, police headquarters, the Holt, Laurelwood Golf Course, around pools and community centers, the downtown flower pots, and so forth. So those are places that we're implementing it now. Also in over 4,000 acres of parks and open spaces. So, the policy that POS uses to implement IPM is kind of spelled out here in our policy and operation manual. It runs to about over 100 pages now, and it spells out preferred actions and preferred management methodologies for dozens and dozens of pests that we encounter. So this is our one of our reference document. Some of the ways that IPM is implemented throughout the parks and open space system, here's an example. We have no spray zones around playgrounds, picnic areas, dog parks, stormwater inlets, swimming pools, and community gardens. So from up to 100, from 25 feet to 100-foot setback around those park amenities, and that means we would not use pesticides in those, except if there's in those setback areas, unless there's a threat to public health or safety. If we had to go and spray a wasp nest, for example, in there, we would, but then typically we would tape off the area, wash down the playground equipment if it's near a playground, that sort of thing. So, some examples here of where facilities management division staff has been implementing IPM and some of the facilities that they're managing. Want to point out here our pesticide-free parks program. Since I spoke with you last year, we've added another park, so we've gone from 8 to 9. The stars on the map represent general locations of those pesticide-free parks, and these are sites that we have committed in which we've committed to not make applications of pesticides, so we are managing them without the use of pesticides, typically through more inputs, hand labor, and also slight adjustment in the aesthetic sort of standards for particular parks. More information about how facilities is using IPM in landscapes and buildings, managing such things as fleas and mice, and even some of the landscapes that facilities manages. They've done a great job with managing crane fly and turf. We continue to partner with Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides in particular, have partnered on developing some white papers that are distributed throughout the region on non-herbicidal control strategies for park maintenance. And we've recently been invited to a kind of symposium in Portland in April to share some of the ideas that we've developed. The city website provides information about integrated pest management, access to the policy and operation manual, so anyone can look at that and sort of share their ideas with us or use our ideas. And we also link to NCAP's website, so people have access to their kind of extensive library on non-chemical pest control methods. So,
Anything you wanted to?
So just a couple of words. Thank you very much, Kevin, and I also want to thank Craig. Both of you have been really great to work with and thought through how to bring this resolution forward. So the resolution doesn't necessarily establish any new protocols, but what it does is provide an opportunity for the council to affirm our support for the protocols that are being employed and to support and encourage staff to expand where they're implementing those protocols to other parts of the city, as well as supporting them in bringing more, and I'll speak to this in a moment, but also would like to expand the pesticide-free parks program and put more energy into recruiting more volunteers to that program and bringing more parks into that system. So we're not necessarily setting up anything new, but we are basically acknowledging the good work that is already going on within our parks and open space, which I think is very important, because when it comes to staffing and budget considerations, having that affirmation, then they know what we are expecting of them and what we're supporting them in doing. So I did have a question about the pesticide-free parks program. It does seem like since we established that, it's been a little slow in getting more parks included, and I wondered if you'd speak for a moment to some of the challenges around bringing new parks into that program.
sure. When we rolled out the program, we started with 6 relatively small, relatively not complex, relatively simple park sites that we thought we could manage pretty easily without using pesticides. So that was kind of a staff decision that was ratified by the neighborhood groups. And then we left the door open, sort of encouraging the neighborhoods to nominate and support parks in their areas to become pesticide-free. Since the initial set, we added Rosetta Park, Washington Park and Friendly Park. We're in a position now where we can support with volunteer coordinator time those efforts, so that if a neighborhood group wants to adopt, and this is happening at Friendly most recently, our volunteer coordinators have helped to organize the groups, go out and do some of the weeding and some of the work in that park. The challenge, and I think Portland saw this when they did their study on making a transition to pesticide-free parks, the challenge is that it takes a significant amount of volunteer organization time. And our estimate, if we were to do something like what Portland looked at doing on their system, it would roughly triple the number of hours that we would need out of a program, and we've now got 3.5 FTE. So if you assumed that we'd be looking at something like 9 FTE then to get that amount of volunteer support to get the number of hours out, if we make some assumptions about how many FTE it takes to get how many hours out, we'd be looking at a program about 3 times the size of what we have now, so getting close to 10 FTE. Now that's if you went whole hog. So again, the challenges are just having staff time and then also interest in the neighborhood. Washington Park started out pretty strong and had that group, I would say, has struggled to keep up with managing that park pesticide free. So it's taken more inputs over time, kind of staff putting more time back into it.
And how many, so when we talk about the pesticide-free parks, we're not talking about Alton Baker necessarily or Washington Jefferson. We're talking more smaller neighborhood parks. Is that correct?
Yes, so far that's what we've done, right? The larger parks with their increased complexity would be considerably more involved.
But you use integrated pest management
Yes,
in those locations?
absolutely.
So do you have a number? Do you know how many of our neighborhood parks are not part of the program?
We have 43 neighborhood parks and 9 of them are, so that
Yeah.
34.
So a significant majority are not in the program.
At close to a quarter, I guess, technically, but
Yeah. So I guess what I would like to encourage, and I don't necessarily think I need to change the resolution around this, but I'd really like to see us just, first of all, do more outreach in terms of letting folks know that this is an option for their neighborhood. And I think it would be great if we could, let the Rotary clubs and other volunteer organizations remind them. I'm sure they were told at some point, but obviously the rate in which we're bringing new parks in has really slowed down. So I think encouraging that activity so people know it's out there and that there is a way to get in. I very much appreciate the challenge around, obviously we can't afford to add 6 more FTE to our parks and open space, and so needing to balance, our resources and the fact that we already don't have enough money for parks maintenance against our desires, and I'll take a second round.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I echo a lot of Claire's remarks and appreciate all the hard work staff's done on this. I wanted to bring it to my colleagues' attention that Jessica sent us an email at about 11:15, late before we came in today, that has some additional information that was sent to her by Lisa Arkin. This is some of the information that I was referencing the other night that deals with neonicotinoids and their effect on bee populations. This is something that I've been concerned about for a long while, and I've kind of gone out on a strange and new and different ledge for me, and being willing to be a little bit more, I don't know what you'd call it, heavy. No, I'd say heavy-handed in the way of being willing to be more regulatory in this, because I'm not sure that I'm not exactly sure that the science tells us conclusively enough that we should be acting with haste. I think, as the state legislature did by saying we need to study this some more, I think we should too. I think if we get to a place where we look at this information, other information staff might present to us, and I'm not suggesting we do a work session on it just yet, but perhaps sometime soon, if we were to discover, for example, that the science was significant enough that you could draw a direct correlation between the use of neonicotinoids and the colony collapse and and the loss of bee populations, I would feel compelled to want to see them banned from use within the city. I know that there's a lot of science that does that connection so far, but I'd like us to study that some more. But if we can draw that line, I think that's something we should consider.
George Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, on the subject of neonicotinoids, we're still using them, I assume?
No.
Completely?
Yeah,
Right.
city staff are not applying.
That's
any
terrific. That's
neonicotinoids.
great news. Yeah. All right. But we're still using weed control pesticides on the grasses in the larger parks. Is there any way to get around that? I mean,
Well, I think, yeah, it sort of depends on the situation, on the site. For example, managing weeds in turf, there's a part of that question that's about aesthetics, and I think we can certainly decide that we're not that worried about that, and we've actually made that kind of transition in parks and open space over the years. There's another little piece that starts to be about public safety. Depending on what the weeds are and kind of the nature of what they do with the field surface, they may present hazards, and we do get some pressure from the sports groups to manage certain kinds of weeds, and some of those we can manage by hand. There's some information in the AIS about the applications that we've made on sports fields in the last 5 years. And we made 5 applications in the last 4 years, and one of those was to manage thistles that we couldn't mow out, and you can't pull them by hand. So we just, you can pull them, but they just keep coming. Right. So we do have some instances, where it starts to be about, it's not just an aesthetic issue, it's not even really an environmental issue, that the grass is just fine with the thistles, but it's not compatible with that use. So we could make some decisions as a community about, kind of how we're going to balance that differently, and certainly push down. But I think we push down on the aesthetic side a lot. We tend to be using pesticides now more for managing safety issues.
Mm-hmm. And what about the dog parks?
Dog parks are pesticide.
My understanding, yeah, that was what I thought. I thank you for confirming that. Yeah, I mean, the reason I realize that every park is a slightly different situation, and thanks for telling about the sports fields. My concern with the grass is, of course, as children playing. It's one of the greatest things in the world to roll around in the grass and wrestle with your buddies and chase people around, and come in contact with pesticides, which we know are harmful, especially for very young children, for them to be exposed. So, okay. Thanks.
Oh, Betty, go ahead.
Recently, I was walking in Hendricks Park, and I saw a sign, herbicides have been applied. What would they be for there?
I think at Hendricks Park it's for celandine. It's an invasive, it's a little invasive plant. It's going to be really beautiful in the next couple of weeks. It's a pretty yellow flower. It was brought in as an ornamental plant in the neighborhood, and it just spreads throughout the park, and it starts to displace all the native orchids and the native, the other kind of native the low-story stuff. And so there's been an effort at Hendricks Park to just kind of keep pressing down on it, and the most effective way that's been kind of identified by the other sort of wild area management agencies has been to make applications of a pesticide at a particular time, and it's right about now.
It was a few months ago I saw it. They're doing it again now?
It's during the winter, before it starts coming out, and it's a kind of like a little nutlet under the ground.
And is it herbicide a pesticide?
Yes, all herbicides are pesticides, but not all pesticides are herbicides. So pesticides include fungicides and antibiotics and things that we use to, like rodenticides and even insecticides and things like that. In general, in parks and open space, the only insecticides that we're using are the wasp and bee. Actually, they're called wasp and bee whackers, but we don't spray bees. We only spray wasps. So other than that, we're just using herbicides.
What about rats?
We are not managing rats. I have a colleague here from facilities. Brian York. Brian, do you want to come up to the microphone?
Yeah, you need to come up and tell this great story here.
People at home.
People at home don't want to miss.
The areas where we have rat issues is in some downtown alleys and stuff, and some buildings. We do trap them, but on occasion we do use some pesticide use, and that has proven to be a more challenging area. So we're working kind of step by step to eliminate different uses of pesticides and stuff, but those kind of things are definitely the most challenging. I would say we reduced the use, but not eliminated it.
So I wonder what it would be like if we just let everything grow. Would it be really bad?
The
little flower you're talking about, would that take over?
The celandine, I think what we'd see is it would, for example, we'd probably just see it would take over all the area under all the rhododendrons and all of that, and spread out into the natural area, which it's already doing in some other areas. Whether that's bad or not, I think that's a community decision.
Actually, it's in the forest part where I saw the sign about herbicides, not the rhododendron garden.
Okay. Well, it may be that they're spraying, this time of year, I'm inclined to think they were spraying the celandine because it's a winter thing. And I know it's been found in both parts of the park up there, the ornamental park, the rhododendron garden, as well as the natural area. So.
How about lemon balm? Does that get killed?
I'm not aware of anybody making applications for a lemon
That's what
balm.
takes over in my yard.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Greg?
Actually, for my rat man here, please don't go away yet, because I don't mean to call you the rat man, but you know what I mean. Because this is an issue that's kind of just percolated up in the last few days for me. But I want to go to something else that kind of is an additional concern. Both Councilor Surratt and Councilor Pryor's ward, which abuts with my ward, has significant industrial emissions. And my question to that is there a compound effect with pesticides and industrial emissions that enhances the negative effects of the pesticides in the park? So if we've got, for instance, we have a park that is not too far away from the flake board plant on, Roosevelt, and some houses over there. And I've had folks in that area, in that general area, tell me that, they're concerned about not only the emissions from there, but also the possibility of other things being sprayed around there to control, invasive vegetation.
I think that it's well outside my area of expertise. I think there is certainly evidence, and we could find that there's studies that suggest that all that environmental loading from wherever the chemical comes from has a health impact. I wouldn't argue with any of that. I just would say it's outside my area of expertise.
Would the EPA have some data on that, or is there maybe some university studies that we could refer to with regard to that?
I'm looking to Lisa Arkin. I think she might be able to speak to that. And
she's mouthing, I don't know, right? The synthesis.
Yep.
Councillor Evans, there's very little data on synergistic effects of pesticides themselves, not to mention the effects of pesticides mixed with industrial emissions. So I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to find anything for you.
I hope somebody somewhere is studying that. The second issue is related to nutria. I have had.
Thank you, brother.
I have had now 2 residents who have emailed me or called me about nutria coming up out of the sloughs that flow through our neighborhood, and at one point one had indicated that nutria were chasing their spouse around the backyard. Just the thought of nutria just kind of just drives me crazy anyway. I know that we have had in the past an extermination program when the nutria have exceeded their they're not native to here anyway, but have gotten out of hand, so to speak. Is that program still in place, and can we get that? If it's not in place, can we reinstate that so that we can deal with these South American rats?
We've never done that.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I was told by a resident that someone had told me we had an extermination program at one point with regard to those.
I've been down this road.
We've all talked about it before, but
I'm not aware of a program that we've had. We tell folks as if they see nutria on park property to give us a call. But that doesn't begin to address the issue with what's coming out of waterways and on private property. Brian, do you know anything?
Well, we deal with them primarily at the Second and Chambers campus, and occasionally other facilities, and that is a case where we do live trap them out, and then we hire a company to do that. And basically, our strategy for dealing with them is, we inform the staff at the sites not to leave cat food around. Usually when we've had problems with nutria, it's because people have been feeding animals, in the area basically. And they come out because they love cat food and other foods. So it's basically a house cleaning issue, but we do not use any sort of pesticides on them. They're trapped out, and I don't know of any official program to exterminate them. It's just on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, Greg?
Worse in February.
Okay, well, now you've got some good information. Tell your constituents to get rid of the cat food in the neighborhood, and
that's a hard problem because people are feeding skunks with cat food in my neighborhood.
It's a big problem.
So I think we're ready to put a motion on the table, but I did want to just say one thing back to the conversation that we started with. It seems like in certain parts of town we have, just the way it is, people are either of the age or of the income or a whole combination of things where there's more people willing and able to get out and volunteer in their parks and help move this pesticide-free thing along a little more rapidly. I think we should have a goal as a community that our goal is eventually to get them all to be pesticide-free. And then I would say, kind of, when we think about our human rights issues or our justice issues and how they intersect with, which I think is what you were kind of alluding to before, and how they intersect with our other policies, that there are places in the community that just don't have people who have as much time or ability, and so we might be more forthcoming with some of those places that we know, and not only reach out, but try to be very problem solvers and think outside the box about how we could encourage or help some of those parts of the community to be able to take that step for their parks too. And I just think that's from that standpoint of why we talk about special transportation needs, connection needs, park needs. It's just people who don't have as much access, having access, and us going out of our way to try to be sure they do. So I just think that's one of those triple bottom line things that we need to be thinking about, and more than thinking about it, we need to just put some special strategies in place to try to encourage that. That doesn't mean that I think we can take on 45 parks, but I do think we might say it would be really good to see in certain parts of the community 1 or 2 parks that are able to step into that with our assistance. So just wanted to put that on your radar, and I bet you could have some neighborhood associations and others that if that idea was brought to them, they'd latch onto it.
Yeah, and I think it's entirely possible that people would be willing to travel across town to support a pesticide-free park in a neighborhood that struggles to, bring the resources themselves. So I think your point's very well taken. It's something we've talked about. So could be a place for us to focus early on.
Because we kind of look at it like, oh, that's too big, but I think maybe if we took bites, we could begin to make a difference. Okay, motion.
I move to approve resolution number 5101.
Second?
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and none in opposition. It passes. And with that,
Nice job,
yes,
Kevin.
sure.
Before we vote, thank you very much for your support of that. Could I make a formal request that I didn't want to change the motion for, but could we ask that staff come back to the council in early 2016 to report on progress towards expanding the pesticide-free parks program, and also considerations around athletic fields and how those management of those might reduce the use of pesticides?
Yes, definitely, and I think it would be good if we just periodically come back anyhow with sort of an update on the whole program, which I think would be easy to do. So yes is the answer to your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody.